AI is a super complicated one, but we're actually giving up happiness in this ostensibly hyper-connected world when we live in these concrete jungles where we actually don't connect with each other very well. In an ideal world, you would sit back and ask yourself, what level of material success do I need to be comfortable and happy? And when I achieve that, how can I put the brakes on at least a little bit and turn my attention to reestablishing and strengthening my connections?
Hi, I'm Matt Maynard. Welcome to the Wellness Report. We live in the most comfortable, hyper-connected era in human history, so why are depression, anxiety and loneliness at an all-time high? Today we're unpacking William von Hippel's latest book, The Social Paradox, which explores why total independence is quietly sabotaging our health, why modern self-care is failing us, and how our evolutionary need for real community has gotten lost in a digital world. Let's dive in. Bill, how does our biological need for human connection and our modern desire for total independence directly sabotage each other?
Well, probably our two most fundamental needs are our need for connection on the one hand, to cooperate, to get along with others, to do things as a group, which we probably started to evolve after leaving our chimpanzee cousins behind several million years ago. And then our second most important need is our need for autonomy, to decide, to self-govern, to self-direct, to decide what we want to do. And I think that's what you mean when you talk about the sort of modern tendency toward independence. And the problem is that, of course, if I'm trying to be connected, well, then I have to compromise. I can't just self-govern. I can't be autonomous. But if I want to be autonomous, then I have to move away from my connections a little bit because, of course, people are going to demand things of me that aren't necessarily exactly what I want to do. Now, the problem is that when these two needs evolved, our connection needs were always met. This is 100,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, living on the savannah. We were always with our group. We didn't have to worry about being around others. And so we evolved the tendency to want autonomy because it was really rare, even though what we really needed was connection. But now we've got this evolutionary mismatch where we don't need connection anymore. I can order my latte in via drone. I can do all my work remotely. I can shop remotely. I never need to encounter anybody. And so my connection needs aren't necessarily met, but I still want autonomy. And unfortunately, the world can give that to me in spades. And as a consequence, people are just spending more and more time alone, aided and abetted by technology, by wealth, by all these factors that cause us to actually get what we want when we get autonomy, but lose what we actually need, which is connection.
And one of those things that seems to be at odds then with connection is this idea of self-care. So let's say in the cosmetic industry, the beauty, all kinds of different industry promote self-care, don't they, in today's world? So what do you make of that? And is it a problem for society?
Well, it's not unreasonable to promote self-care in a world where we're disconnected. But the reality is self-care is not what we evolved to do. We evolved to look out for each other. And so what really makes us happy is not when I go through some sort of mantra of self-care with myself, but rather when I'm around others, they look out for me, I look out for them, and we all connect to each other in a way that makes sure that our needs are met. And so self-care is sort of it's a little bit like social media. It's the sort of second best compared to real face-to-face interaction. It's a whole lot better than no care at all, but what we really need is others looking out for us.
You just touched on social media, so we'll come to that now. And does that promote a kind of community aspect, or do you not see it that way?
Well, look, social media has its goods and bads. On the positive side, it allows you to connect with people who aren't immediately with you. So, for example, my sister lives in London, and she and I chat on social media all the time. It just makes it a lot easier, and it's much nicer to be face to face with Zoom link or a camera. You feel like you're actually there together. But the downside of social media is that people also use it to replace their social interaction, their face-to-face social interaction, rather than just to enhance it or to accompany it. And so what we have is we can see lots of evidence for this now, what I call social media induced laziness in our social habits, with this absurd acronym of SMILCH. And when people are smilching, what they're doing is they're getting on social media rather than getting together in person. Because, of course, it's kind of difficult to get together in person. It requires you to take a subway or walk or ride your bike to do something, whereas you can just kick back on your couch and look at your Instagram feed. And as a consequence, people are tending to replace their face-to-face social interaction rather than just enhancing it or accompanying it, which is really what social media is best at.
There's definitely a lot more people now that suffer with depression, whether or not that's down to the fact that people are more likely to be diagnosed. But do you see there to be a connection with this disconnect between material wealth and emotional fulfillment?
I think that's a big part of it. And there's a lot of different ways to look at that question. But let me give you two examples. The first example is human beings have been moving to cities for the last 5,000 years, but the trend really took off about 150 years ago. And at that point in time, only 10% of humanity lived in cities. Now, over half of humanity lives in urban areas. And with that many people voting with their feet, you'd think, oh, well, cities must make us happy. But actually, to the contrary, they don't. People are happier living in the countryside than they are living in the city. And so we moved to cities for a host of reasons that have to do with autonomy and things like that, that have to do with the modern way that our world is run. But we're actually giving up happiness in this ostensibly hyper-connected world when we live in these concrete jungles where we actually don't connect with each other very well. And there's other really nice data that showed that religion has the same effect. When people attend religious services regularly, they end up being much happier than if they don't attend religious services at all. And that effect is even stronger if you're wealthy. So wealthy people, they just tend not to get together with others. They don't really need others anymore. And if they believe that they ought to go to services regularly, now they start to do so, for religious reasons, but the upshot is it actually makes them a lot happier as well.
So, in your book, you talk about the hunter-gatherers, and they faced daily struggles, right? And now everyone seems quite comfortable. Not everyone, but a lot of people in this world are quite comfortable. But are they happier? You argue that they're not. And is the solution to that then this need to have friction in people's lives, to have challenge and overcome obstacles?
Yeah, I think challenge and friction and obstacles are good for us for a host of reasons. And I think part of the problem with anxiety and depression is that we now live in a world that is so safe, not for all of us all the time, but in general, that's so safe that we don't meet the challenges that actually would give us something to really worry about. And so we start to worry about things that are residually left over. And by way of analogy, you can think about our immune system. It's been honed for hundreds of millions of years across many species till finally our version landed on us. It's this incredibly strong, incredibly effective device. But the problem is we now live in a world that's so clean that it often turns on ourselves. We develop these autoimmune disorders because our immune system is looking for bad guys and there aren't any. And so it turns inward in an effort to struggling to differentiate between self and other. Now, I think you can see the same thing with the depression and anxiety. When I was a kid, people were way more likely to die in car wrecks, way more likely to have physical conflict. Also, crime was much higher. Any of the metrics that you care about in the world were much worse then. And it's one of the wonderful things about the world that all those have mostly gone away. They're much better anyway. The downside, of course, though, is that we still have that same mental system that's designed to keep us safe. And now when there's nothing to actually worry about in the physical world, we start to worry a lot about the mental world. Well, what did Matt mean when he said that? He hurt my feelings. We start to worry about things that we just didn't worry about when we actually had physical dangers that we were confronted. And that, of course, leads to enhanced depression and anxiety.
Yeah, and I mean, why can total freedom as well feel so deeply isolating? Because all of our brains are biologically overwhelmed by having endless career, dating, and lifestyle choices. To have a healthy life, do we need to narrow down the options, do you think?
Well, it's a funny thing, in principle, we all want enormous options. We all want to be able to choose from 1,000 choices, 1,000 possibilities. But in reality, when we have so much choice, it overwhelms us, and we often don't make the best decision. There's some really wonderful research by Sheena Iyengar where she shows that if you walk into a chocolate shop and you're only offered a few options, you reliably pick the one that you like the best. But if you're offered like 1,000 different choices of truffles and a million different, you get confused and overwhelmed, and you often pick things you don't actually like that much. And so we can get overwhelmed with choice because we never faced an environment where we had that much choice. Our ancestors never asked what's for dinner. You could look it over, whatever's been killed is lying on the ground next to the campfire, that's for dinner. And maybe a few things that somebody dug up. They never asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? Everybody hunts and gathers. Our life is full of choice, which is a wonderful thing in some ways, but it can also be overwhelming because there's so much choice. that lands on us in a world where we now live in such a different environment that we evolved that we're just not psychologically prepared for that all the time.
But once the box is open, how do you go back then, Bill? How do you return to a world with less choice?
You can't. You're absolutely right. Once the horse has left the barn there, and so what you can do though is, and I think that we will, is find tools that help people deal with it effectively. And so I remember when I was in academics teaching for about 30 years, and often my students were really excited about a particular career they'd chosen, but often they felt paralyzed. It's like, I just don't know what to do. Everybody tells me to follow my passion, but I don't know what my passion is. And so that's the tricky part. How do you take somebody who's 18, 22, whatever age, and help them figure out what they want to do in principle for the rest of their life, figure out what their passion is? And right now, we don't have good tools for that. But I suspect that, as options multiply and as our societies get richer and people have more and more options to do things, even if they're not necessarily lucrative, because they know that their basic needs will be met, I think we're going to get much better at helping young people figure out what it is that they really interest them and how to help them pursue it, even if only for a while.
If there was someone that say that ate right, meditated, went to therapy, followed all the self-care advice, yet still felt chronically anxious, what core evolutionary piece are they missing in their life?
Well, it's hard to know with certainty, right? Because on the one hand, there always have been individual differences in anxiety, for example. Even hunter gatherers, some of them are anxious. And now, mind you, they have lots to be anxious about, but most of them aren't. And so, in our modern world, there's also things to be anxious about. And if you just have evolved, they're called polygenic scores. They're the collection of genes that influence all of our traits. And if you evolve polygenic scores that are high in anxiety, it's something you're going to have to fight with your whole life. That's just the reality. It's we When we look across domains, we see that about half the variability in how we feel about things and who we are physically and mentally is explained genetically. And that doesn't determine your outcome, but it certainly pushes you in one direction. And so, for example, people with high polygenic scores for obesity are much more likely to be overweight than people with low polygenic scores for obesity. But to their credit, many of them are not. It just means that they have to fight a battle that their genetically thin friends don't. And the same, of course, holds for anxiety. You might be missing something in your evolutionary life, and if you are, it's almost a guarantee what that is connection. The deep, close relationships with people that you care about, who care about you, and who you see regularly. People who suffer from depression and anxiety, that's most often the piece of the puzzle that's missing. But with that said, if you have the bad luck to have genes that push you toward depression and anxiety, even if you're surrounded by people you love and who love you, you're going to suffer sometimes.
How in your own life, Bill, have you implemented action upon your discoveries through your research and writing your books? What is it that makes you different, do you think, from others that are less aware?
Well, I try to follow the data. And so one of the things that I've seen, for example, is that we're all spending much more time alone. And so I thought to myself, all right, there's a lot of things that I like to do that I'm typically doing alone, but I don't have to do them alone. For example, I love to do the crossword puzzle. And my little sister who lives in London also loves to do the crossword puzzle. And so we do them on the New York Times platform. And by Monday and Tuesday, it's pretty easy. But by Thursday, it's pretty hard. And so when she wakes up in the morning, Greenwich Mean Time, she makes herself a coffee. She calls me up on WhatsApp, so it's free, or Zooms me or whatever. And then we sit down and we do the crossword puzzle together. And it's my evening, it's her morning. And so we know we're going to do that Thursday through Friday. And here I'm doing something that I wanted to do anyway. So I'm not adding something new to my day, but now I'm doing it in a social context rather than doing it alone because I don't want to be alone. It's not me seeking solace. It's just that I like to do the puzzle and people often do those things alone. So I think the first answer to that is that don't do things alone unless you want to be alone. Find others to do them with you. That's one of the key things that we see. That just increases happiness a lot. And I know it's certainly made a difference in my life. I quite enjoy talking to her regularly. And before, we were just so busy that we hardly got in touch with each other.
So there is some good use of social media at times when used properly.
Absolutely. When it can extend connections that would otherwise be hard to maintain. Now, there's lots of other things you can do as well. I now live in the country because I work remotely for Whoop, which is a biometric capture company headquartered in Boston. And so I don't live in Boston. And it occurred to me, well, why not live in the country? I can have satellite internet, and I can do my job, and then I can live in a smaller community where the data show that people are happier than they are in the big city. And so I try to take a look at what the data show and follow them to the best of my ability.
Can people be happier living in a city, and what advice would you give to those people that can't get out?
Yeah, so the key about cities is they didn't used to make us unhappy. If you go back to the 1950s, there was not nearly as much residential mobility as we have now, and as a consequence, people in cities knew their neighbors well. The problem with cities today is that there's so much mobility that you don't necessarily know the people who are in your own building, much less in the building next door to yours. And so, what I advise people who live in cities, and that's where the job requires them to be aware of all their families, they don't want to go for whatever reason, or they love the city. What I advise them to do is if you feel like you don't have a good social network, try to do activities that bring you to the same places at the same times on the same days. So, by way of example, let's say that you go out for coffee twice a week. Go to the same coffee shop at the same time on the same day, because you know what you'll find? There's another group of people who reliably are at that coffee shop at that time and that day. Go to the gym and train at the same time on the same days every week. You'll find that you actually start to develop a community of people. Even though you all live in a big city, you'll start to get to know the people who do those activities at the same places and the same times that you do.
Bill, what effect do you think AI is having on the workplace and people's sense of purpose?
AI is a super complicated one. It's an interesting problem because it used to be the case. Remember, I mentioned earlier, nobody asked our hunter-gatherer ancestors, "What do you want to do for a living?" They're like, "I hunt and gather. I've got to get something to eat." Um, we now regard what we do for a living as a major part of our identity. It's easy to imagine in a post-AI, post-robotic world that we'll only work if we feel like it, and many of us probably won't work at all. We'll probably, lots of goods will be sufficiently cheap or even free. There may be universal basic income. Lots of things about the world are going to change rapidly. And one of them might be the way we define ourselves through our occupation. And so you can easily imagine a world where we have to go back to hunter gatherer life where we don't define ourselves by what we're going to do, because they certainly didn't. But they did define themselves by the skills that they thought set them apart from the group, the skills that they thought made them helpful and useful to others. And I suspect that we'll do the same, that we'll be the one who people go to for their social problems, or we'll be the one who people get together to play sports because we're the most fun. We'll all have something about ourselves that makes us valuable to our community. It just won't be work anymore.
Okay, and also on AI, a lot of people might use AI as like a companion to feel less lonely. What do you think of that?
Look, on the one hand, it's not a bad idea if the AI gives you the kindest and most patient responses, and your partner or your friend or whoever is tired of hearing about whatever the issue is that you want to talk about. And so I am a big believer in using these AI platforms, and there's quite a few of them now that are often very good, of using these platforms to talk about problems that you don't feel comfortable talking to other people about. It's just good for you. And so, for example, there's a big literature showing that one of the problems of being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse is that we're less likely to talk about it than we are surviving other kinds of abuse. And when we're less likely to talk about it, it hurts us more. So if you can talk about it with AI, that's probably, from all the data we know, probably just as good as talking to a human about it. So AI can be really useful if you don't feel comfortable talking about those issues with others, or if you don't have close others to talk to. But again, it should supplement and not replace. And so I might feel most comfortable talking about my anxiety to AI because I'm not comfortable talking to my partner or my children or my friends about it. But I should still talk to my partner, my children, my friends, whatever, about the other things in my life. You don't want AI to become your only companion.
Bill, kind of running out of time, but just want to ask you then if you could give a takeaway message to the viewer about how that they can improve their situation for human connection and why and the importance of why that is.
I would say this, that a lot of us we pursue autonomy in order to be a success. And that makes sense, particularly when you're young. You work hard, you try to develop a name for yourself, a reputation in your field, so that you can be a successful person. But you have to remember that the whole reason to do that is to then make yourself more valuable to others, to make others attracted to you. And so don't pursue that forever. In an ideal world, you would sit back and ask yourself, what level of material success do I need to be comfortable and happy? And when I achieve that, how can I put the brakes on at least a little bit and turn my attention to reestablishing and strengthening my connections? Because in the end, what I often see are what I call sad success stories. People who pursue autonomy, who become very successful in their careers, but never return their attention to the social connections. And then suddenly they find themselves getting old and alone. And yes, they've been very successful in their field, but they come home at the end of every day and just feel sad about what they've got in their home life. And you don't want that to happen to you. You want to translate your success at work into giving yourself more free time that you spend effectively with people you love and who love you.
Brilliant. Bill von Hippel, your book, The Social Paradox, is it out now?
Mm-hmm.
It's out now. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you, Matt.